All right, guys, so what we're going to talk about today is quadratic equation applications. We're going to be focusing on real world scenarios or semi-real world scenarios, basically word problems, and we're going to be using the information we need. So let's go ahead and look at number one. And it says the width of a rectangle is 6 meters less than its length. Okay, so it's really important that you pay attention to what's going on here. The width of a rectangle is 6 meters less than its length. Okay. So what we have here is we need to go ahead and write two expressions. So if L is length, width equals length minus 6 meters. Okay. So it's 6 meters less than the length. So the length minus 6. And length is just the length right now. We know that the area of a rectangle can be found using the formula length times width. And in this case, the area is 112 meters squared. And it wants us to find the dimensions of the rectangle. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our expressions for L and for W, and we're going to plug it in here for W. So we're going to rewrite our equation as area is equal to length times width, or length minus 6. And then we're going to distribute our L so that our equation becomes L squared minus 6L. And then we're going to set that equal to 112. So 112 equals L squared minus 6L. So now we're going to solve for L. We need to make this equal to 0, so we're going to subtract 112 from both sides, and that makes our final quadratic equation, even though it has an L instead of an X, as 0 equals L squared minus 6L minus 112. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and plug that into our quadratic formula, which remember is X, or in this case will be L. L equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And then we're going to simplify by plugging in our values that we know. So A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is negative 112. Now these are some big numbers, so we're definitely going to want to use our calculator with this. So first of all, let's plug them in. Opposite of B, so opposite, negative 6, plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared, minus 4 times 1 times negative 112. All of that over 2 times 1. So now let's simplify further. We're going to have L equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. And we have a negative here and a negative here, so it's going to end up being positive. And let's see, what's 4 times 112? 2 times 4 is 8. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 1 is 4. So 448. All of that over 2. Now let's go ahead and add 36 to 448. And 8 plus 6 is 14. Carry the 1. 4 plus 3 is 7. Plus 1 is 8. So that's 484. So length is going to be equal to 6 plus or minus the square root of 484 over 2. And then we are actually only going to worry about whichever number comes out positive, okay? Because length cannot be negative. So let's go ahead and use a calculator to come up with the information we need. So again, if you don't have a graphing calculator or a scientific calculator available to you at home, Desmos.com does have a scientific calculator available. Just go to Desmos.com and click scientific. And then we're going to put square root of 484, and the square root of 484 is 22. So that gives me L is equal to 6 plus or minus 22 divided by 22. So we have 6 plus 22 is going to be 28 over 2 is 14. And 6 minus 22 is going to be negative 16 over 2, which is negative 8. So again, we are not focusing on the negative numbers because length is positive. So our length is 14 meters. And since width is 6 less than that, it's going to be 14 minus 8 is, 14 minus 6 is 8. All right? So let's just make sure that works. We're going to check and make sure that 14 times 8 is 112. 8 times 4 is 32. Oops, I should be writing the 2. Carry the 3. 8 times 1 is 3, or 8 times 1 is 8 plus 3. 8, 11. That gives me 112. All right, we're going to skip down to number 3, mostly because all of these questions are pretty much the same, and we're just going to do a couple of examples, and then I'm going to do one example that isn't on this particular page, but just as a demonstration. All right, so number 3 says the dimensions of a rectangle can be expressed as x plus 6 and x minus 2. If the area of the rectangle is 65 inches square, what are the dimensions? So it doesn't matter which one's length and which one's width. I'm just going to go ahead and set length as x plus 6 and width is x minus 2. And the reason it doesn't matter is that in this case they did not specify which dimension was which. And remember, multiplication is commutative. That means 6 times 3 and 3 times 6 are the same answer. So for this purpose, it doesn't matter which of these two we use as our length and which we use as our width. And in this case, area is 65 inches squared. So our formula for area of a rectangle, remember, is area equals length times width. And then we're going to plug in our length and width and our area because we do know our area. So area is 65 equals x plus 6 times x minus 2. And again, we're going to go ahead and put these, distribute them. Let's go ahead and distribute them. All right, so x times x equals x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. 6 times x is 6x. And 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. All right, and that's all equal to 65. And then we're going to combine like terms. So 65 equals x squared minus 2x and positive 6x are like terms, so plus 4x minus 12. And then we need it set equal to 0, so we're going to subtract 65 from both sides. And then 0 equals x squared plus 4x minus 77. And now we're going to use those numbers to plug into the quadratic formula. So in this case, a equals 1, b equals 4, and c is equal to negative 77. And we're going to plug those into our formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. And so therefore we get x equals the opposite of 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 77. All of that over 2 times 1. Simplify. So we're going to move from here up. So we're going to have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. And it's going to end up being plus because minus 4 and a minus 77. So let's see what 77 times 4 is. 4 times 7 is 28. Carry the 2. 7 times 4 again is 28. Plus 2 is 30. So that should be 308. All of that is going to be over 2. X equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of, let's add 16 to 308. So that's 14. 8 plus 6 is 14. Carry the 1. And that's going to be the square root of 324 over 2. So that gives me x equals negative 4 plus or minus 18 over 2. Now we'll double check both the positive and negative answers, but we want to make sure that whatever we get, our dimensions are positive. So x equals, let's see, negative 4 plus 18 is 14 over 2. And then negative 14 minus 18 is negative 22 over 2. So x equals 7 and negative 11. And we're definitely going to want to use the 7 for both of those dimensions, because if we use a negative, we'll end up with negative length or width. All right, so if length is x plus 6, then it's going to be 7 plus 6, which is 13. And width is x minus 2. So that's going to be 7 minus 2. And that's going to be 5. So our dimensions are 13 and 5 inches. Okay? So it doesn't, again, we're not, notice how in the answer where I boxed it in, I did not specify which was length and which was width, because again, it doesn't actually matter which one's length and which one's width, so long as you are paying attention and writing the right numbers. All right, so the last example we're going to go over today is not on the notes that I put out. I'll get those resubmitted to you. But number 9 here, this is one that I'd cut off, but I want to go over it because there are problems like this on the exam. So if we look at number 9 here, it says find two consecutive positive odd integers such that the square of the smaller integer added to 3 times the larger integer is 24. So I know that sounds like a lot of complicated information to be given, so let's break it down into smaller pieces. So first, we are looking for two consecutive positive odd integers, okay? So again, that means it's going to be positive or they're going to be positive and they're going to be whole numbers because they are positive integers. So odd integers are always 2 apart. So if x equals the smaller integer, and let's say y equals the larger integer. Now, the larger integer is going to be 2 higher than the smaller integer because they are consecutive odd integers. So that would be 3, like for example, I put 2, but 3 and 5, 5 and 7, 7 and 9, 9 and 11, those are all consecutive positive integers. So y is actually equal to x plus 2. That is our larger integer, okay? And so we want to say that the square of the smaller, okay, so the square of the smaller. So let's go ahead and come up with that. We have the square of the smaller integer added to 3 times the larger integer, which is x plus 2, is 24. So we need to make sure we're paying attention and reading out loud the math that we're writing. It is a good thing to be able to do. Not everyone can write math in words. Okay, that's a very important skill to have. All right, so now we're going to simplify this. So it's going to be x squared plus 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times 2 is 6 equals 24. And then we want this to be 0, so we're going to subtract 24 from both sides. And that's going to give me x squared plus 3x minus 18 equals 0. And then we're going to go ahead and plug that into our quadratic formula to get x. So a equals 1, b equals 3, and c equals negative 18. And our quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right. And then we're going to plug in our numbers. So x equals the opposite of b, which is 3, plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 18. All of that over 2 times 1. And we're going to simplify further. X equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9. And again, we have minus and a minus, so it's going to end up being positive. So 18 times 4 8 times 4 is 32. Carry the 3. 4 times 1 is 4 plus 3 is 7. All of that over 2. And we're going to add 9 to 72. That gives me 81. So we're going to have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 81 over 2. And so then we're going to have x equals negative 3 plus or minus 9 over 2. And we want the positive answer. So let's check. X equals negative 3 plus 9 is 6 over 2, which is 3. And negative 3 minus 9 is negative 12 over 2, which is negative 6. So the answer we're looking for is 3. So if the smaller is 3, 3 plus 2, the larger is 5. And that's all we have to do there. Okay? So when you see these ones that are saying this number of consecutive integers, this consecutive integer, make sure you're paying attention, because if they're consecutive integers, then they're going to be plus 1. If they're consecutive odd or consecutive even, it's always going to be plus 2. Hopefully you won't have to deal with negatives, but it could possibly be negatives in the future. Just make sure you're paying attention to what's being asked. Most of the time they'll say positive, but they'll clarify if they're not. All right? So go over these notes, go ahead and try the assignments out, and we'll get looking at see what we need to correct, and then you can submit the exam question for credit. We'll put those exam questions out next week, and you will be able to use this information to do that. I hope everyone's having a good and safe time, and make sure you go ahead and get in touch with me if you have any questions. Have a good day, guys. Bye.